Senator Gillibrand, great state of New York, serves on the chair of the Armed Services Subcommittee on Personnel, on Aging, on Intelligence, Agriculture, and even more than all of that, has taken the time out of her incredibly busy schedule to become a truly deep expert on digital assets, which is remarkable. Now, I say this from some personal experience because when I testified in front of the Ag Committee, we had a really remarkable exchange, I think, and I highly encourage people to look this up. Because you not only asked me questions that were extremely on point about DeFi, but you yourself articulated the proposition that fundamentally underlies that part of this industry. And so I have to ask, what prompted that interest in digital assets? You're a longtime learner, longtime advocate. How did it all begin?
So my first exposure to blockchain and digital assets really came through my role on the Intelligence Committee, because it was an issue we started having hearings on to see how is this relevant? How is this relevant to intelligence and national security? And the more I got involved in it, the more I realized this is a huge opportunity for disruption in financial services. It's an opportunity for democratization of access to capital. It's an opportunity for organizing communities and organizing information. And so the more I got engaged in this space, the more excited I got that this was an opportunity for real progress and financial innovation. And so I started to learn more about it. I also had a role on the Ag Committee because we're in charge of commodities. So that became another lens on which I reviewed digital assets and what type of regulation would make sense. And I come from New York, and so a lot of my constituents are also in this space of digital assets and financial innovation. And so I started meeting with them and their businesses to find out, what's your business plan? How does it work? What are the challenges? What regulatory frameworks are you looking for? What would make sense? What would work? What wouldn't work? And through that effort, I got to start working with Cynthia Lummis, and we spent about a year writing major legislation to begin to create a framework for digital assets for the United States.
So someone else who is a deep expert in this space is Senator Lummis. And the two of you, when I say deep expert, I need to really make sure that you all understand what I mean. It's not just on the policy surrounding this and the fundamental proposition of why it matters. These are women who can talk technically. They can ask questions about the edge, the cutting edge of innovation in ways that occasionally I'm like, I'm going to have to get back to you on that with someone who's a deep technical expert. And there are some, I think, in this room who have the illusion that one party could actually drive forward legislation. And there are others of us who, as has famously been said, can count to 60 and understand that bipartisanship is not a nice to have. It is critical and essential. And you pioneered bipartisan legislation, that approach, with your partnership with Senator Lummis. But could you talk to this room about how does a bill actually become law? Why is bipartisanship so crucial and critical to any legislation, particularly to our industry at this time?
So right now we have a divided Congress. The House of Representatives is majority Republican, the Senate is majority Democrat. And so to pass legislation, you're going to need a bill that's widely bipartisan in both bodies because they have to pass both bodies. And so one of the reasons why Senator Lummis and I feel so committed to this is we felt that we should write a bill to create a framework for the entire market so that each of the committees of jurisdiction could do the hard work of having hearings, marking up legislation, and passing parts of the bill. Our bill addresses things under the jurisdiction of banking. The SEC is under the Banking Committee. It addresses jurisdiction of agriculture. The CFTC is under agriculture. Commodities are under the Agriculture Committee. Standards for cybersecurity and for consumer safety, many of that's going to go under the Intelligence Committee. And then last, taxation and finance, that comes under Ron Wyden's committee. So you've got 4 committees of jurisdiction, and so our bill hopefully will get marked up at some point in each of those committees, or something like our bill, so that people can see various versions of how to get to an answer. And the same thing would have to happen in the House of Representatives. And so to get even started, you need a coalition of Democrats and Republicans who are willing to work on the topic to get it through their committees, and to then have a debate about what's the right way, what's the right framing for regulation. And that's what Cynthia and I have started, and I've met with all the chairmen of those 4 committees, not only asking them to have hearings, but to review our bill and make edits and make comments. We've also met with stakeholders, both regulators and market participants, to make sure we receive their information and their views and their guidance and feedback. And this is the second version of the bill. The second version is far more robust than the first version. We went into a lot more depth into different areas that we thought were necessary. And so we're hoping to go through this process. Most of our bill was marked up, or was at least had a hearing in the Ag Committee. That's the hearing you're talking about. where we tried to give guidance to that committee about how to refine their bill and make it stronger. But we've yet to have hearings in the Banking Committee on Stablecoin or the SEC market regulation. We've not had hearings yet in the Tax and Finance Committee either, that Ron Wyden's committee. So we're hoping we can get those additional hearings this year.
And again, to drive the point home, those committees are run by Democrats because, of course, the Senate is majority Democrat right now. And so getting hearings in those committees in part depends on having broad Democratic support bicamerally for understanding why this technology is so crucial to keep the United States and to support here. But let's spend a little more time on the RFIA. So the bill that the senator is talking about, the bill that she has with Senator Lummis, is called the RFIA, Responsible Financial Innovation Act. Could you talk a little bit about some of those key changes that you made before it was reintroduced? Consumer protection, I know, was something that was quite critical and important to you. Maybe just do a high-level overview of what's different.
So one of the biggest challenges we had was the collapse of FTX. A lot of our colleagues wanted to know what happened, how do we prevent this from happening again, what was the challenges that allowed this criminal activity to take place. And so we really focused a lot on what we can do to make sure that would never happen again. We made sure that oversight and accountability was defined by the nature of the assets. We made sure that there was no chance of a digital asset entity borrowing from some depositors in order to make investments in another hedge fund, so that structure could never work. And it would never have worked if that company wasn't registered in the Bahamas anyway. It would have never worked if it was registered in the United States. And so we just really doubled down on the consumer safety pieces, the safety and soundness pieces. We made sure we have a lot more clarity on how we protect consumers. We also recently rewrote provisions for anti-terrorism financing, anti-money laundering provisions, and we were actually able to create a consensus bill to put as an amendment in the Armed Services Defense Bill. That bill passed the Senate, a version of it passed the House, and they are now in conference. That legislation should pass by the end of the year. And so all of those changes were directed to make sure people understood that if you have regulation, that is the best way to protect consumers.
So we talked about FTX a little bit just now, but could you just top line, what are some of the other concerns or challenges that you hear from colleagues about the industry in general? And I know that a lot of those are addressed in the RFIA and the redo of the RFIA, in the NDAA amendment, but are there kind of top line concerns that come up over and over again the industry should be thinking about how to address?
Well, one area where we added to our bill was in DeFi. It was an area where people didn't understand what it was or what a protocol is and how it might work. And so, for example, when we did the Ag Committee markup, their first version of that bill didn't provide for DeFi. It basically required any DeFi company to do the same thing as a bricks and mortar bank would do, which doesn't make sense. Doesn't have a board of directors necessarily. It doesn't have the same structure. And so the bill made no sense for that industry. And so we made sure in this new version that we looked at how do we create safety around DeFi and where in the process do you create minimal standards, and we put that into the legislation.
So concerns really are about consumer protection, consumer safety, guardrails, illicit finance, hacking. There have been some very obviously publicized hacks that have happened that have caused consternation, understandably, in both chambers, I think, of Congress. And some of these, I think, are also being addressed in some of the other bills that we're seeing. So coming out of the House, we have the market structure bill, FIT 21, the stablecoin bill. I know you have a lot of views on these two, particularly stablecoins. Would love to hear, first of all, your views on those bills, if you're willing to share. And then also how you see the progress of those bills. Mm-hmm. And we can get into, if you're game for it, how the government shutdown plays into all of this, because of course that's looming.
I've recently met with Congressman McHenry, and the stablecoin bill that he's put forward is very strong. It actually creates a carve-out for New York markets, which makes DFS really excited because they are one of the most substantial regulator in the country, certainly the most robust, certainly the most utilized, and so there should be a role for them. So that's a smart aspect of that bill. And it agrees with me on some other provisions. I think stablecoins should be fiat currency only. I think they can be issued by state banks and federal banks. The House bill has the provision for state entities like DFS. And I think that the future of algorithmic stablecoins should be really in a different area. They shouldn't be allowed to be called stablecoins, and they should have a different level of regulation because they don't have the same safety and soundness and security that a fiat-backed stablecoin would have. So those are areas where we agree, and it's exciting to have a House bill. Our Senate bill would be very similar, and we could easily conference the two. In terms of market structure, our views are actually complementary. They're not against each other. I like the frame that we put on our bill that if you're going to decide a regulator, it should be based on the characteristics of the digital asset itself. I like the test to say, is it a digital security, using the Howey test, using case law, and actually codifying that. I like the test of what's a commodity. Is it fully decentralized? Does it have the indicia of a commodity? Is it no longer raising money for a centralized organizing entity? Those are all characteristics that we would see in a commodity like Bitcoin. So I like the way our bill does it, but there's a lot of stuff in McHenry's bill on market structure that we agree with. So again, it's a great place to start. And if we could ever conference the two bills, we would find a very strong, happy medium.
So at the Crypto Council, we actually support both of these bills, and I have to say that the pending shutdown does throw some roadblocks into the possibility of a floor vote. So could you talk to us a little bit about that? What's going on there? How should people out in the world who aren't as familiar with how Washington works understand this shutdown and this current version of it?
So we've had government shutdowns in the past, and they never go well. What happens when the government shuts down is that certain parts of the government can't spend money, cannot work, cannot go to work, and some of those employees will not necessarily get their money anytime soon. So if you're somebody who is paycheck to month is really important to them, they're going to be harmed individually. For everybody else, it really hurts the economy. The last time the government shut down, it was about a $12 billion drag on the economy that was never recovered. So it has huge economic impacts. It's also bad for public safety. A lot of the parts of the government that can't get funded affect public safety. Something as simple as making sure that we inspect the food that comes into the United States. Food inspection does not happen during a government shutdown. So there's just all these different areas where the government's not there for you in the ways they should be. How does it affect your industry? It might affect your regulators. Timeliness. Not all those regulators will be able to come into the office. They won't be employees that are essential, and so work won't get done.
So things that might already be frustratingly slow at a regulatory level will only get potentially even more slowed down and slower. But since we rang that bell, let's talk a little bit about the balance of power, because of course Congress is one branch of government, and we have, of course, the judicial branches, we have the executive agencies. How do you see that over the course of your long storied career in the Senate? Have you seen that balance shift? There's a perception, I think, I'll just speak on behalf of Californians. There's certainly a perception among Californians that in Washington, that balance is shifting, and the where the White House is engaging and not engaging, the way the agencies are working, the new status of SCOTUS, all of that is shifting things and putting, I think, more pressure, I would say, or more onus on Congress to actually do the job of creating the rules that govern us. How do you see those three branches playing out, and have you noticed or felt any kind of difference in either the urgency around passing legislation or in hesitation maybe to do so because of maybe these other factors?
So we have a divided government and balance of powers for a reason, so that no one part of our government's too powerful and can't decide everything by itself. Congress has always had the power of the purse. We're the ones who are supposed to write legislation and decide how money is spent for the U.S. government. And those aren't powers that the executive branch has. It has to start from us. But the executive branch can make a difference because they can set agendas. They can ask Congress what they want out of them. They can set out a set of ideas that they believe are the right ideas that can guide Congress. And certainly in your industry, we're looking for more and more White House leadership and White House participation because we want to hear their views. We want them to weigh in on what can make a difference. I don't think legislation by enforcement is smart. I don't think Gary Gensler and the SEC should be doing the kind of enforcement actions without any legislative guidance that they're doing. I think that's been very destructive and damaging and outside their purview. But Congress does need to act. And so having a White House that has ideas and thoughts and aspirations in this space would be helpful. But at the end of the day, we have to write the legislation and we have to pass it because it is our job. And that's incumbent upon us to get that done.
And do you have advice for how industry can engage with policymakers and better advocate? So there are, I think, some tactics that I would argue are not successful. I think shouting at people on Twitter is not a successful tactic if you want to engage policymakers. But are there proactive, positive things that can be done that are useful, that help advocates like you or people who really understand this in Congress make the case to your colleagues who either don't understand or might come at it with a highly skeptical or even hostile take?
I think the best advice I would have for anybody here is just to engage with your policymakers on what your business does, who your customers are, what your vision is for the industry. I think it's really important that senators and House members have the chance to learn about your businesses, about the industry, about the technology. Not everyone is a technological expert or expert on financial services or an expert in this space. And so taking the time to meet with your elected leaders is really valuable, because you can explain to them what you're trying to do and why you think it's going to make a difference and help people and help businesses, help consumers, and help our economy overall. I think your business case is important to be articulated so that people understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. Not everybody takes the time to learn it, but asking for those meetings can make a big difference.
And do you have concerns about the offshoring of the industry and what that would mean for America's security, frankly, defense, intelligence?
I think it's a terrible outcome, because the one thing that U.S. has that no other country has is we have the best and strongest financial services system in the world. We have the best and strongest judicial system in the world. And so if we can regulate and create a system that works for the industry so that we have transparency, accountability, along with safety and soundness, along with consumer protection, it means markets will rush here. It means industry participants will want to be part of the American economy and the American system, because we allow for consumer protection. We pride ourselves in consumer protection, and other countries do not. And so customers will want to participate in your industry, in your business, and in your services. And so that's the key. If we can regulate, we can keep markets and we can keep participants. It allows our economy to grow. It allows us to compete worldwide. And that's better for New York, and it's better for America.
So given all the moving parts, the global piece, the court cases, administrative actions, the bills that are moving, this is the crystal ball question. If you had to kind of gaze into a crystal ball and foresee how you think this might ultimately play out. First, I think we're clear on how you hope it will play out, and I think we're aligned here. I hope the U.S. retains the competitive edge and retains the innovation that we have brought, frankly, to the global financial and technology systems over the course of many, many decades. But what is that crystal ball kind of throwing up for you right now?
Well, I think passing a stablecoin bill is the low-hanging fruit, and we should absolutely try to do that this Congress. I also think passing a market structure bill is possible this Congress, and so those two pieces would be the highest priority. We've already done the anti-money laundering and know your customer and anti-terrorism financing provisions in the defense bill. It's there, it's workable, it's smart, and it can be implemented. So I would really hope that we can create a national conversation around at least the two next pieces, because it would make a huge difference. And there's such a willingness on behalf of the leaders within the House and the Senate to do this. We just need to create consensus and create momentum with other members understanding what's at stake and why it's important.
I couldn't agree more. I think these are like the gateway drugs, if you will, to other things that I think are also really important, but they are the low-hanging fruit, and they're there. They're right for the
They're
taking.
ready to go, and they're bipartisan.
Yeah. Well, I hope you'll all join me in thanking the Senator for her leadership, for taking the time today, Senator, to come and speak with us.
Thank you.